Mario! Mario!
Mario! Mario! Mario! Mario!
Mario has been around for a very long time. In a lot of ways, he's the vanguard of the gaming revolution, and has been the face on the forefront of some of the most consequential steps in video game history. The most interesting thing about Mario is how much he changes and yet how much he stays the same. You can't really say he looks that different from how he did in the very first game he showed up in, but you also can. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks we are going to take a trip through the evolution of Mario. The first game with Mario in it was not, as you might expect, a Mario Brothers game. In 1981, a game called Donkey Kong came out. The titular character was a large ape, and not Mario, and Mario was not Mario, he was Jumpman. In the original lore of Donkey Kong, Jumpman had a pet ape by the name of Donkey Kong. Unfortunately, Jumpman mistreats Donkey Kong, who escapes and kidnaps Jumpman's girlfriend, the Lady, and no, I'm not making up these names, this is what they were originally called. Obviously, characters eventually gained names, but Jumpman was a fairly apt description of Mario. As for visuals, he basically looked the same as he does now, except for one notable difference. Way back in the day, he wore red overalls and a blue shirt, as opposed to blue overalls and a red shirt. This was actually something that drove me absolutely nuts growing up, because I couldn't keep track of what color scheme he had. It would go back and forth, but we'll talk more about that later. As Jumpman, Mario's goal was to go from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. At the top, his girlfriend Pauline, who has nothing to do with the Mushroom Kingdom in any way, shape, or form. She's just a normal, everyday, real-world dweller, just like Mario seemingly is. His gameplay was a little bit simpler. He didn't really have any moves other than jump, climb, and grab a hammer power-up, but there's beauty in simplicity. It was one of those games where people immediately understood what to do, and it was endlessly fun to continually do it. Its sequel is one of the more interesting portrayals of Mario in that he is not the good guy, he is the bad guy. Apparently not content to simply get his girlfriend out of the clutches of Donkey Kong, Mario, now named Mario and not Jumpman, imprisons Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong Jr., Donkey Kong's son, rescues him. One of the more interesting thoughts I've had about Mario is that the very first time he was called Mario is also the only time he was ever a bad guy. This game is kind of strangely empathetic towards a kidnapping large ape, but I also feel like that change of perspective is very interesting because basically every other portrayal of Mario in existence is unambiguously good. I guess way back in the day, Mario had a bit of a mean streak. Visually, he didn't look any different, he just didn't do as much. He kind of stood at the top and took the role of Donkey Kong while Donkey Kong Jr. Jumpman'd his way around vines and generally mixed up the gameplay. It was a fun game, but Mario was a popular character, and you don't usually keep popular characters in the antagonist role. In 1983, Mario Brothers came out. It hit the arcade with a different take on what Mario was. He and his brother Luigi were plumbers in New York City of Italian-American heritage and were defending New York from monsters that were coming out of the sewer. Again, he could only jump, but he could actually defeat enemies in this game, albeit it was a different way than he eventually would come to do on a normal basis. Mario couldn't just jump onto an enemy to defeat them. He would have to hit the floor underneath them, knock them on their back, and then jump on them. Mario was a game in which enemies would come at you in phases. We would call it a wave-based game nowadays, in which groups of enemies would attack and you would have to defeat them. Mario himself looked a bit different in this game, with a few more pixels and a few more frames of animation, taking on a slightly more plucky appearance, notably with blue overalls and a red shirt. Just want you to keep that in your mind as we talk about each iteration of Mario. Mario Brothers was still a fairly simple game. It still existed on one screen, and although it exhibited a lot of the mechanics that Mario is known for today, there's not a lot of new stuff introduced the longer you play it. That changed in 1985 with the release of Super Mario Brothers. While Mario was back to his trademark red overalls, that was probably the only thing familiar to him. Super Mario Brothers takes place in the Mushroom Kingdom, which is absolutely not New York, where Mario fights the enemies that maybe were crossing over into New York. Maybe that's how he got there. We don't really know for sure, but I mean, it's not a big leap in logic to make. And all of these enemies had a boss, Bowser. certainly a much more actually evil antagonist than Donkey Kong, Mario then had to be unambiguously a force for good. But the guy's a plumber, so he didn't really buy any new clothes for the occasion, although his sprite is significantly bigger, and his animations include some cool things like when he changes directions and he has to deal with the inertia. I think that's actually a pretty cool thing. It's a nice little artistic touch. Mechanically speaking, Super Mario Bros. Introduced a lot of the features that still define Mario games today. There's the fact that Mario could now run if you held the B button, levels that gradually introduce new little gimmicks, new themes, types of levels with different mechanics like swimming levels and levels where you had to avoid things as opposed to just jump on enemies and find the end. It also had power-ups like the Fire Flower, which allowed Mario to shoot fire, and various other abilities that aided Mario in his quest to save Princess Toadstool, now known as Princess Peach. Mario was a fantastic game, genre-defining and even era-defining, and as it goes with something successful, they wanted to repeat that success. Another game was created called Super Mario Bros. 2, at least that's what it was called in Japan. If you ever play that game here, it's Super Mario Bros. Lost Levels, and the reason why is because it's both too similar and too much more difficult than the original Super Mario Bros. As far as the actual game engine, it's a carbon copy of the first game, aside from some additions and mechanics like weather and a few other things, but the levels created for it were significantly harder than the levels in the original game. Because of this, Nintendo of America requested a different Mario 2. Now in the United States, there was a pretty big delay on the NES's launch to sort of give the 1983 video game industry crash some time to heal. The first Mario did so well, and the arcade version of Mario was great up until it started including some of the levels from the Lost Levels, that Nintendo really wanted something that could appeal to the mass audience as opposed to the hardcores. That's why they ended up making Super Mario Bros. 2, at least the version of it that we know here in the United States. The North American Super Mario Bros. 2 was actually Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which was essentially a completely different game. It had different mechanics. I mean, it had a lot of the Nintendo trademarks in it because it was actually made through license cooperation with Fuji Television and featured some things that were specific to Fuji Television because there was an event in Japan involving Fuji Television that no one from North America is going to remember or understand. But hey, weirdly enough, they included enough Mario conventions that it really wasn't much of a big deal to make it into a Mario game. The sound effects, the Starmen, the warp zones, the POW blocks, that stuff was all there. The mechanics though were pretty different. You could jump on something and it didn't kill them. You had to lift it up and throw it. You had to do this same thing to bring up coins and onions out of the ground. It's actually kind of a really weird game, but it's a hell of a lot of fun, and despite being pretty different, is lauded as one of the better Mario games out there. Mario actually looks pretty cool in USA Mario 2. He's still that plucky plumber, but for whatever reason, he really has a lot of personality in the Mario 2 sprite. I think it's partly due to the fact that instead of having him going directly to the right, he's turned just slightly so you can see both of his eyes, and the sprite is detailed enough that they show the whites of his eyes. He is again wearing his blue overalls and red shirt, and of the NES Mario sprites, in my opinion, this is the best one. The style of it really brings out the personality in the character, and it's really just a fun, interesting, and very different game from the first. Super Mario Land hit the Game Boy, and it looks a lot like the very first Mario game if you took out all the color. It's set in a different place, but all of the gameplay is the same, and although it's a little bit short, unfortunately, it is one phenomenal game. No comment on the overalls Mario is wearing on account they're in black and white. Super Mario Bros. 3 originally came out in 1987 in Japan and here in North America in 1990. Mario looks pretty different from either of the other two versions of Mario that had existed on the NES prior. He's got black overalls as opposed to any color overalls, but he's also a little bit desaturated. Mario 3 is probably the dingiest of all the Marios. Not that that's a ding at it, it's actually one of the better games in the entire series. Mario 3 introduces the idea of different power-ups. These different power-ups give way to different types of levels that have certain advantages baked in that change if you can fly or if you can jump like a frog. The successor to this game, Super Mario World, is often looked at as the series defining the penultimate version of Mario, at least 2D Mario, but the truth is a lot of the things that were added in Super Mario World were actually added here in Super Mario Bros. 3. But that doesn't mean that Super Mario World wasn't a big jump. Out in 1991, on the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System, it was the first Mario platformer on a system more advanced than the NES. And it shows. Mario, now exclusively in blue overalls, gets the benefit of a near limitless color palette, at least relatively speaking, and this is pretty much what Mario has looked like ever since. The sprite in Super Mario World is easily the in-game representation of Mario that most clearly resembles the box art, at least up until this point. Super Mario World also notably adds Yoshi, which, if you ask Shigeru Miyamoto, was something he had wanted to add literally since the first Mario side-scroller. The SNES finally gave him the power to do it, and Yoshi became a very interesting companion that has been in every Mario game since. Yoshi is intrinsically part of Mario at this point in time. Keeping that in mind, Super Mario Land 2, which was meant to be more like Super Mario World, actually didn't have him in it. Still, the Mario in that game looked very much like the Mario World Mario, albeit black and white, and the gameplay mechanics more closely resembled Mario World than Mario Brothers. The smoother, more refined version of the old school gameplay with a little more inertia in the player, more elements of using the power-ups to solve environmental puzzles, not complex ones, but still, they're there. But this is pretty much where 2D Mario's evolution stops. 3D Mario starts a few years later on the Nintendo 64 platform with the introduction of Super Mario 64. No longer having to worry about resembling the box art, they could outright base 3D models on the box art of Mario, and that they did. The Mario in Super Mario 64 is just unmistakably everything we know and love about Mario in a slightly low polygon model that still kind of does more to look like what we all know Mario as from art than anything prior. The movement to 3D stages also changed up a lot of the dynamics of the game itself. Mario was able to slide on his belly, and stages often contain an exploration element or a seeking the various stars element. It diversified the gameplay a little bit, sometimes to the game's advantage and sometimes to its detriment. Easily the coolest ability that Mario 64 added was the backflip, but it also added things like wall jumping. With a 3D space, Mario needed to be able to do a lot more, and Super Mario 64 essentially served as a blueprint for every single 3D Mario game. Now from here, I think it actually makes a lot less sense to talk about this from the perspective of chronological new games. Mario evolved in a different way from this point forward because you had 2D Mario games, you had 3D Mario games that were more course-based, and you had 3D Mario games that were more exploration-based. On GameCube, we saw Super Mario Sunshine, which brought Mario even closer to the Mario we know today. It took the defining Mario 64 look and added more polygons, giving him a smooth, more realistic look without actually modifying the idea a whole lot. He had more expressive eyes as well as body animations that helped further characterize him. Also, he wore a short-sleeve shirt because the sun was shining. Mario Sunshine, it's hot. I mean, the sun's kind of always shining in Mario, but still, they were drawing specific attention to it with the title. As far as 2D Mario goes, between Mario Maker and the new Super Mario Bros. Games, they just basically kept on that incremental approach where they kept adding slightly newer things each time, keeping everything interesting, and generally building on a very solid formula. The difference really now is that they can use the 3D Mario model from the newer games and have much more visual congruency. Mario looks the same everywhere now, which is basically an advanced version of the Mario 64 Mario. A much higher poly count, much closer to that drawing of Mario. 3D Mario has even developed in several different directions. With the Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario 3D World games, you had more course-based mechanics that felt a lot more like the old school Mario type level, but in a 3D fashion. In all honesty, this is my favorite version of 3D Mario. I think that these are phenomenal games and they do the things that Mario is known for best. But that doesn't mean the other 3D Mario iterations aren't good or worth talking about. The Super Mario Galaxy series gave us something that was somewhere between course-oriented and exploration-oriented that gives you a totally new perspective, putting Mario on spheres and walking him around in a manner where gravity is not similar to any other game, the environments being simultaneously small and big, small in scale and big in, well, ground covered. We've really seen a lot of different styles of Mario through the years, and they've all developed in different directions and yet have felt strikingly the same, and all of this seems to be heading heading into Super Mario Odyssey, the Nintendo Switch game that's coming very soon. Thus far, it seems like a return to the free roaming of Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine, the more exploration-based gameplay, but I have to say that there are a lot of things that remind me of the more course-based games. The thing that's most interesting to me about Mario Odyssey is that it seems like a legitimate conglomeration of all of the 3D Mario ideas. And that's either going to be incredibly good or maybe not so good. And also New Donk City is super weird. Like, it's still weird. I thought I'd adjusted to it, and then I looked at it again and I was like, nope, I guess not. But like I said at the very start of this video, the most interesting thing about Mario is how much he changes while staying the same. He's always managed to be recognizable. He's always managed to be familiar, while oftentimes changing up gameplay in totally unexpected ways, a la Super Mario Galaxy or even Super Mario 3D World and Land. Those games are not obvious to make, and yet they're amazing games. In my opinion, those are probably the better examples of 3D Mario games, despite them not being nearly the first ones. One thing's for sure, and that is Mario is here to stay. And the Nintendo Switch, Mario or not, has been a massive success, so there's a little bit of pressure to give everybody the Mario game that they all deserve, you know, for the support. That kind of feels like that's what they're going for, too, despite the fact his hat is now sentient is, you know, super weird. That kind of weird has always been present, though, between the frog suits and the water vacuums, and it was a lot of fun going back through all the various Mario eras and remembering just how far he has come. What's your favorite Mario game and why? Leave us a comment, and if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on GameThanks.